I would like to move that this House, A, acknowledges the need for reliable energy sources in the regions, B, recognises that energy infrastructure built above ground is and will continue to be impacted by changing climates and natural disaster, C, agrees that creative and diverse solutions will be necessary in the future to maintain a stable supply, and D, considers a decentralised power grid as a means to provide increased stability and reassurance of continued reliable energy during a time of rising energy usage. Thank you.
Members, the Honourable Sophia Mormont has moved that motion, and the question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable Sophia Mormont.
Thank you, President. Now, it is an interesting time to bring forward this motion. Our vulnerability to outages has been demonstrated several times already, and certainly the timing of the fourth full country blackout after several extreme weather events in Cuba is a timely reminder of how vulnerable we all are. With so much of our infrastructure dependent on a reliable electricity supply, including for food storage, agriculture, medical care, mining and communication, it is obvious the need for continuous reliable energy. It has also been noted that when power costs are low, it benefits small businesses, boosting our economy and driving down unemployment. Now, the cost of electricity and the reliability of supply also disproportionately affects those who are less well off and those who may be elderly or dealing with poor health. Access to air conditioning or heating will become more important as our climate becomes increasingly erratic. It then clearly becomes a human rights issue, something the World Health Organization specifically recognises. Now, as a relatively wealthy state, we are in the lucky position to be able to implement various measures that will provide a buffer to future climate and economic variances. Yeah. Currently, most of our energy supply network is above ground. This leaves it very vulnerable to climate events and accidents. Everything from fires, thunder to floods, to car accidents. The blackout affecting the wheat belt in January and the one in Bunbury in July, for example. Now, with our very obvious reliance on power for almost every aspect of our lives, these power outages are very inconvenient, very costly, and may well endanger lives. Apart from the obvious maintenance that above-ground systems require, there's also the loss of energy due to resistance. Now, physics isn't my forte at all, so I'm unable to work out how much power is lost in servicing the regions. But it would be interesting to know how much we need to produce extra to be able to cover our needs. Now, in Northern Europe, most power supply cables for domestic use are below ground, and this has been the case for decades already and has very much reduced power outages, even in cases of bad weather and traffic accidents. We seem to be okay there. Now, it is still prone to human error, so when digging in the wrong places, and I'm not quite sure how to fix that bit. So in Australia, currently, all aspects of power creation are controversial. You've got nuclear on the one hand and renewable sources on the other, and fossil fuels also being controversial. Now, I love science, and part of finding long-lasting solutions, I think a wide range of options needs to be considered. But like anything controversial, it is hard to find reliable data. Now, we are dealing with corporate interests, subsidies, grants, mis and disinformation, ideologies, and all of those create biases and echo chambers. Human nature is showing itself to be one of the biggest obstacles here. Now, so far, the energy sources that I am personally aware of are wind, solar, coal, hydro, gas, wave technology, nuclear, both with plutonium and thorium, methane and oils. Just quickly about thorium, that's not really researched quite as much. The radioactive waste associated with thorium remains radioactive for about 100 years, whereas when you're looking at traditional nuclear with plutonium, that can be many, many thousands of years. Another aspect of electricity usage and security is how we use it, how much we use of it, and if we have energy-friendly designs, for instance, for housing, cars, and other areas that we may use electricity for. So there are a whole bunch of parameters that we have to deal with in ensuring security, reliable energy going forward. Now, to be able to do that, we also need unbiased data from our institutions, basically, and that seems to be difficult still. Now, one of the big solutions that I think that is creative that would address some of these issues is looking at microgrids. Now, they rate quite high. These grids could be for the individual household, and we can see that, say, with people wanting to live off-grid, and certainly in farming communities. A lot of farms are self-sustaining. It could also be slightly larger, say for a suburb or a small town, or a number of households connected to that same grid. Now, the move towards localised, decentralised energy sources represents a significant shift from traditional centralised power models. Now, there's a lot of advantages for remote and vulnerable communities in Western Australia, because when you look at our geography, we are a massive state, and getting power everywhere is a big challenge. Now, a lot of our remote communities rely on diesel generators. Now, I'm sure that could be improved. It's not just the making of diesel that has a carbon footprint, it's also the transport of diesel to these locations, and then obviously the use of diesel there as well. And I think we can do better there. At the same time, in the southwest of our state, communities like Walpole are making progress. For example, Western Power's small hydroelectric dam in Walpole is the first pumped hydro microgrid designed to improve power reliability for the local community. It uses 2 farm dams to store energy by pumping water uphill when renewable energy is abundant, and then during high demand or outages, the stored water is released to generate electricity. This system is expected to provide backup power for the town of Walpole for up to 2 days, which is much longer than typical battery solutions, but we need more than 48 hours. So what we need is a system that doesn't rely on long transmission lines or short-term backup solutions, but instead gives communities the ability to consistently generate and store their own energy. And this is where microgrids really come into play. They are localised, can operate independently or in conjunction with the main power grid. By using solar panels and wind tulips, I'm not going to talk about wind turbines quite so much, mainly because there's some concerning data around the vibration that they cause in the area. There's also been shown to be microclimate changes related due to wind turbines as well. So I'm going to be talking about wind tulips, and they are small units that can be made from hemp, by the way, that don't cause vibration and can be installed on someone's roof very simply. So, and they're very safe. And thank you for your response to my hemp point. Always fun. All right. Now, by having those microgrids, obviously we're making the systems much more reliant and stable, less vulnerable to environmental factors. So if a transmission line were to go down, entire regions could be left without power for days or even weeks, and a microgrid, by contrast, ensures that the local community can continue to operate regardless of what happens to the larger grid. Now, beyond the environmental benefits, microgrids offer communities autonomy. By generating their own power, they become less dependent on centralised providers who may not always have the capacity or interest to prioritise smaller, more isolated regions. This level of independence enhances resilience for those communities, reducing disruptions and just making it safer overall. Now, in addition to providing stability in the face of disasters, microgrids reduce transmission losses. Traditional power systems often lose a significant amount of energy as electricity travels from central power plant to homes and businesses. The microgrids, by contrast, generate and use electricity locally, which means less energy is wasted and the system overall becomes more efficient. But microgrids can also exist without the burden of energy management being placed on local communities. It can and should be placed onto the government and responsible entities. Now, the government, rather than small communities or local councils, should oversee the provision and maintenance of these systems. By doing so, we create jobs, stimulate local economies, and ensure that the technical and financial complexities of energy provision are managed by experts. Now, Western Australia has already begun taking steps towards this future. The Australian Renewable Energy Agency has funded several microgrid projects across the country, including in our own state. One such project is the Onslow microgrid, which integrates solar battery storage and gas-fired generation to provide a more stable and sustainable energy supply. Onslow's system is a model for how remote communities can reduce their reliance on diesel while transitioning to a cleaner, more resilient energy future, especially as this transition moves past the gas-fired component, hopefully onto additional generation capacity and battery storage. Now, the benefits of microgrids extend beyond large-scale systems. On a smaller scale, individual households can adopt similar setups, installing rooftop solar panels alongside home batteries to ensure their energy needs are met even during outages or fluctuations in grid power. These systems not only save money but also increase a household's self-sufficiency, which can be crucial during emergencies. Households can also have the flexibility to switch between being autonomous or connected to the grid, depending on their needs and preferences at any given time. Now, that grid could work with larger industries as well, where they could complement each other. Many large-scale industries, for instance, such as mining and manufacturing, are now turning to renewable energy sources to meet their carbon offsets targets and reduce operational costs. As industries increasingly adopt wind, solar and battery systems for their energy needs, they are setting a precedent for decentralising energy generation. Now, the shift towards self-provision among heavy industries opens the door for collaboration with local communities, as I stated earlier, by developing microgrids that serve both industrial operations and nearby towns. We can create a symbiotic relationship where excess energy generated by industry can be fed back into local grids, providing stability and reducing costs for households. This decoupling of heavy industry from the grid is not just about reducing emissions, it is about creating a more resilient, decentralised energy system that benefits everyone involved. By integrating these industrial microgrids with community-based microgrids, we can build that more interconnected network of localised energy systems. This reduces the overall demand on the main grid, making it more reliable and reducing the likelihood of large-scale blackouts. It also allows for more flexible, adaptive energy system that can respond to the unique needs of both industry and local community. So just going back to hemp, because I can, hemp is also being seen as a new material for battery manufacture. I have spoken about that here before as well. Now, I don't know yet how efficient those batteries are necessarily, but what I have noted is that there are increasing issues with lithium batteries. So recently, while I was on a flight in Europe, we were told that if any of our gadgets were to overheat, to contact the flight attendants. Also, no lithium batteries were allowed to be stored in your luggage. You were allowed to have it in your bag as cabin luggage. So I think that the concerns around lithium are increasing, and that hemp will hopefully offer a less flammable version of a deep cycle battery at some stage. Lithium mining is also quite toxic to the environment and still requires us in the southwest especially to remove trees, now called ecological thinning. Hemp is a sustainable resource. It grows really quick. Can be used in houses to create houses that are much more energy friendly, and batteries as well, plus things like wind tulip and other materials or other builds that require a strong fibre. So I'm hoping that this discussion today will enlighten me about what the government's going to do and the opinions of others in this chamber. Thank you.
President.
Members, the question is the motion be agreed. Sorry, I'm looking for indication from the opposition's spokes. Thank you. The Honourable Steve Thomas.
Thank you, President. It's nice to see such an enthusiastic response to a motion from the Honourable Sophia Mamond and her very the entire crossbench President was all leaping to their feet. So it's enormous enthusiasm, and it's not even a Thursday. So well done, everybody. Very pleased to make some contribution to this on behalf of the opposition. And it's a very good motion that the Honourable Sophia Mamond has moved here. Now, I want to address this each part in turn, and some of these will be fairly quick and some of them obviously take a little bit more. So, Part A of the Honourable Sophia Mamond's motion calls on this House to acknowledge the need for reliable energy sources in the regions. Now, obviously that is a no-brainer. I mean, obviously we would support, surely the entire House would support the need for reliable energy in the regions. The only issue is, of course, you need to provide reliable energy in the metropolitan area as well. And the assumption that metropolitan Perth has a completely reliable power system is probably questionable at the start and will get worse over the incoming years as the state government gradually undermines and erects the energy system in the state. So whilst now it's average, let's say fair to middling, it is going to get worse over time. So I'm hoping that the Parliamentary Secretary and the government might actually redirect themselves into a better energy system, because metropolitan Perth shouldn't necessarily, President, be excluded from the need for reliable power. So I think possibly we can just assume that we're going to discuss across the entire state. Now, Part C also is easy to agree with, agrees that creative and diverse solutions will be necessary in the future, and I want to do a bit more of that in detail. Part B, I might just address at the outset, that is, recognises that energy infrastructure built above ground is and will continue to be impacted by changing climates and natural disasters, and that is true. That is true that they will be impacted, particularly by storms, as we've seen in the supply lines to Kalgoorlie twice, a couple of years apart, in 2022 and 2024, with significant storms in January each of those years, and the failures of the backup system in 2022 under this government were, well, under the previous Premier, but the same government, were repeated precisely through 2 years of lack of action and incompetence to get to 2024. So the disaster that occurred in 2022 was perhaps a good warning sign that something different should be done out at Kalgoorlie, and nothing was done. The backup system failed, and the backup system failed because it wasn't big enough or good enough to actually do the job. As news reports have demonstrated, you know, the average demand out at Kalgoorlie is 100 megawatts, give or take, in peak demand. And the backup units, when they're both up and going, is about 57 megawatts, and only one of them has black start capability. So the 20 megawatts that you might be able to get up in the first instance, of course, as soon as that goes into the system crashes. Because even the big units at Collie, where I come from, in that patch, the big units at Collie have safety protection on them, so that if you don't have enough energy in the system, the unit will shut down to protect itself. So if you can only put 15 to 25 megawatts into a demand of 100 megawatts, you know what the first thing it does is shuts down. Now, they knew that in 2022, and they did some maintenance and they played around with it and did nothing serious about it. And the same thing happened in 2024, 2 years later. And it's that old saying, isn't it? You know, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. And a shame on the government for actually not doing something about fixing that particular problem. Now, the President announced that they're now going to attempt to fix that problem, and another 2 years will have gone by. So in 2026, they're hoping to get more than 100 megawatts of backup capacity into the system, so that you can actually restart the system with the backup generators that won't switch off automatically because you don't have enough power because they're not big enough. Pretty simple science. Pretty simple science. Why wait 2 years in the middle of the biggest boom the state's ever had to fix the problem for the people of Kalgoorlie? I've got no idea why you messed around for 2 years trying to find a solution, but because the solution was given to you. But anyway, so yes, I would have said that certainly there will be impacts on energy infrastructure. The problem, honourable member, with underground versus above ground is that when something goes wrong underground, it can be incredibly difficult to find. And our issue is that we're a widely dispersed state with energy demands, and lots of things that happen in Europe, of course, happen over very small areas. So the problem with putting everything underground, particularly transmission, those bigger lines, is that, yes, because you're using much bigger cables, the heat that's generated is massive because you have greater resistance on the bigger cables. And that is a problem for the maintenance of those lines. And the second component is when something does go wrong, so water seeps in for some reason or something else goes wrong, if you've got 100 kilometres or say you're going to Perth to Kalgoorlie, if you were to try and underground that and go, what's Perth to Kalgoorlie, 400 and 500 kilometres? Something like that, whatever it is, whatever the right number is. If something goes wrong on that line and you can't find where the fault is, it can be pretty difficult. You've got to dig the line back up again to find it. Now, there are some more involved in technical tools now that assist that process and make it better. But for those two reasons, general undergrounding of transmission lines is difficult and generally fairly uneconomic. Now, that's not to say you can't underground some lines. Sorry? Yeah, well, that's right. So, so the Pilbara experiment didn't go so good. So, it is the case that you'll still want to, whatever happens, you'll want to maintain some overhead lines because of the resistance and the fault-finding exercise. But when you get into, say, down to the streetscape level, for example, where it's much easier because you're not looking at hundreds of kilometres of distribution. So in that local distribution area, you can go underground because generally you're a chance of finding over a smaller area where that fault lies. So it is a useful tool, and towns and city blocks, they like to see it go underground. It's not an eyesore in front of them. And you don't have to deal with Western Power poles, because probably most members get complaints about Western Power poles being in a position that interferes with somebody's capacity to use their block. I assume that the Parliamentary Secretary gets some of those. I know I certainly do, and I forward them on to the Minister, and in some cases there's nothing you can do about it. So where you get that, when you can underground that power at that level, it's a useful thing. But for distribution, it's probably not going to be, for the time being, the go-to position. Which leaves us with I guess Part C and Part D to combine us with a bit. Part C I've read out. Part D considers the decentralised power grid. And there's lots of work that can be done along these lines. Part C is the area that talks about creative and diverse solutions, and there will be creative and diverse solutions. I've got no doubt. The only thing I probably disagreed slightly with Honourable Sophia Momond in your contribution was the line where you said nuclear on the one hand and renewables on the other, because there's actually no reason why you can't integrate the two. So the two aren't mutually exclusive. Now that's not to say that there is impending nuclear power coming into the grid in Western Australia. There's a whole pile of other arguments around that. That include cost and cost-benefit analysis and a proper business case, and it's got to be efficient and effective, and it's got to fit into the Western Australian grid. And all of that will take a lot of working through, and there'll be a fair bit of time and research that goes into that. I think they're really interesting conversations. I've said lots of sensible things about nuclear power. Remember, you haven't been listening to it. I've said lots of sensible things about nuclear power. We're not afraid of nuclear power, but it's got to fit in, and the business case has to work. And that has to be the case. And that's not a simple discussion, Honourable Sophia Momond. That's a tough one. And sort of you're right. So, and there are thorium versus uranium, for example. And I think you said plutonium, but ultimately plutonium degrades down into, uranium can degrade ultimately to plutonium, but they'll generally be uranium-based reactors. And those are the larger units, sort of 1,000 megawatt plus. The smaller thorium ones, you can get down to 300 megawatts, you can get down to 50 megawatts, but it's the cost per electron that becomes the issue. And the small modular reactors are, according to the GenCost report, about 3 times the price per electron than the uranium reactors. And the big reactors are too big for the grid in Western Australia, which peaks out at about 4,500 megawatts. Of course, to get down that low, the government has to ask a few companies to shut down as a part of that process. So you don't want more than 10%, as I've said before, in one generation unit. Which means at 4,500 you don't want more than 400 megawatts, and 300 megawatts is about the right size, probably. But the economics of that is more difficult. So there's lots of discussion to have about that. The cost, does it fit in? And by the way, Collie is not the only place that you could potentially put one in eventually. All of that takes a lot of discussion in a long period of time. Well, as we found out in questions last week, there's a gazetted area north of Perth at Ledge Point where there's actually a gazetted nuclear power plant zone. Yeah. Charles Court put it in. So there are other places. And the other thing, of course, is you need somewhere with lots of water, which is an issue for Collie. So there's lots of water. There's lots of other places. It's where it's gazetted, Ledge Point. So there are plenty of other locations that can be looked at.
Order, member. Let's bring the contribution back through the chair instead of across the other side of the chamber. Might be helpful for everyone trying to understand, including Hansard. The Honourable Steve Thomas.
Thank you, President, from your protection from the interjections from the other side. So there will be a great degree of creative and diverse solutions, and generation will vary. So there are some interesting projects going out there. Hydropower is very difficult in Western Australia. I mean, I agree with the former Energy Minister, the Honourable Bill Johnston. We've got everything for hydropower, really, except mountains and water. Apart from that, so it's very difficult to deliver. And the little micro project down south, I agree, is interesting, but it's a little micro project that's very hard to replicate anywhere else. So that's not going to be a big contributor in the future. There will be some more wind power, and there will be some more solar power that comes into the system. Now, interestingly, the Western Australian example is a fairly good one in that the insanity that's gone on in the eastern states, both in terms of terrible gas policy and resulting in this mass profusion of wind farms and solar farms in the eastern states, is not looking like it will be replicated by the government and Synergy and Western Power here, or Horizon Energy. That doesn't stop the private sector from being highly optimistic, President, about how it might make use of carbon credits, for example, to put additional generation. And if you look at what's happening in Western Australia in that renewable sector, There are proponents out of Europe and Asia that are coming in suggesting they will put not a few gigawatts. So we're 4,500 megawatts, so 4.5 gigawatts. There are proposals out there for 10, 11, 12 gigawatts of wind production, and there's multiples of them. And the first question you've got to ask is, where is that all going to get sold? Because there's no marketplace in the state system. Now, I was particularly pleased to see the Premier of this state, the Honourable Roger Cook, a couple of months ago, suggest that the government would need some additional fossil fuel generation. I thought that was great. As I've said in this House previously, I think he made a mistake in that he actually said they're going to build another coal-fired power station, which I think the people of Collie would have been quite excited by, but I think he's actually got it wrong. Not that the government actually bothered to acknowledge that and correct it. I think what he was saying is, like the opposition, they're going to have to build some more gas-fired generation to have enough dispatchable energy to keep the lights on. So, again, pleased to see that the state government is slowly adopting the opposition's energy position. And, you know, if you need a copy of the policy, parliamentary secretary, so you can try and get it right, I'm happy to talk to you about it. Might be a small cost involved, but you know, nice to see you coming along into the correct area of energy discussion. I think that's really good. So a little bit more gas generation to maintain dispatchable energy is good. Of course, and we have similar views, as far as I can tell, on some of the more ridiculous wind farm proposals. So now, that's not to say, President, that you can be opposed to wind farms across the board in every location, which I think is actually a silly position to take. Sorry for those members, it's a silly position to take. But where you are putting it in the wrong place, it needs to be called out. So I was particularly pleased to see last week the Leader of the Opposition federally, Peter Dutton, turn up and announce a scrapping of the wind farm zone in Geograph Bay if the opposition wins the federal election. That was a good outcome. And I support that absolutely, and I know the local federal member, Nola Marino, supports it absolutely. The other federal members like the Honourable Andrew Hastie support it. The new candidate there, Ben Small, he supports it absolutely. But interestingly, yeah, well, you know, he's been a senator. He's been in this House twice. But interestingly, the state government's position on this. So the City of Busselton wrote to the government, wrote to the Minister for Regional Development, the member for Bunbury, and received this as a part of the answer. Given the cost and complexity of offshore wind, we do not see it as a viable option for the foreseeable future, and it is not a focus of the WA government. So I actually agree. Well done, Parliamentary Secretary. We're an agreeable lot. We really are. I like a bit of agreement on a Wednesday so we can dissent on a Thursday, President. Now, it's nice to see. So the interesting thing is the state opposition and the federal opposition and the state Labor government are all in lockstep on this. We're all in furious agreement. Geograph Bay is the wrong place for a ruddy great wind farm. Fantastic, fantastic. The only people who aren't actually on board with the common sense component is, and I'll be hoping you'll confirm that, Parliamentary Secretary, in a bit, those comments. I'll send you a copy in a minute. Now, everybody's on board except Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen, who said basically you'll have a wind farm zone out there. I mean, congratulations, they knocked it back from 7,000 square kilometres to 4,000 square kilometres, right out there where people in the southwest boat and recreate and fish and dive and all the rest of it. But, you know, so state Labor, state opposition, federal opposition, we are united. And I love a bit of unity in the parliament, President. I love a bit of unity in the parliament. We are united that this is a dud place to put a wind farm zone. And the problem is that once you declare it a zone, it'll be impossible to stop someone putting thousands of wind turbines out there. So this is a good outcome. I'm not opposed to wind generally on principle, and I'm not opposed to it where there is a good location for it. And I know that there are people who will oppose it in their backyard. The NIMBY group will come along every time and oppose it. Much of the research is quite interesting, though, and the Honourable Sophia Mamont, the federal government did some interesting research some years ago on wind turbines because there was grave concern about the potential health impacts, and pretty much all of that was dispelled. Pretty much all. pretty much all. Well, there was some of that. There were pretty much all of
That
those
was
health
his study,
issues
wasn't it?
were dispelled.
That it was an
now,
eyesore
it's not
to
to
the
say that
Canberra
they don't
community.
have mental health impacts for some people who hate to look at them if they can see them, and that probably has an impact. But in terms of others, so I'm a little bit cautious about that. There will be more wind turbines. There will be more solar panels, both, and most of those solar panels will be rooftop solar. Most of those will be rooftop solar. There might be the odd solar farm come along, but the Western Australian model in a small marketplace is better than the eastern states. And that's not to say that the Labor Party is handling it well, because they've got impending disasters in their hands. They won't be able to close the coal system on the time frame that they've got, which is purely ideological, has nothing to do with energy supply. They need more energy generation. They need more storage, and they need increased transmission. But interestingly, they can't even tell you how much increased transmission they need. And they don't have a budget for any of these things. What they are doing, which I think is interesting, and probably comes to the crux of my contribution to the motion by the Honourable Sophia Momond, what the state Labor government is doing is waiting for the private sector to save its bacon. What the state government is doing is sitting back going, the private sector is going to build all these wind turbines, the private sector is going to build all these batteries, and there are proposals out there. I get briefed on them all the time. Some of them are reasonable, some of them probably less so. Sorry, I couldn't hear it. Sorry. Oh, yeah, well, it's the actual grid distribution itself is probably not worth selling these days. If you're going to do it, you need to do it when it was worth something. It's like trying to sell your old EH when it's got 400,000 Ks on it. You know, you got to sell it when it's got some value. However, but don't worry. It's a great interjection, President. It's a great interjection, because you know what the Labor Party's been doing? It's been selling off power assets. You've sold off wind farms. You've sold off wind. So the Labor Party is more than happy to sell off electricity assets. You sold off wind farms. You sold them to the private sector. And the Honourable Ben Wyatt, my good friend, was the Energy Minister at the time. So you've sold off. You've privatised. But what you do, and it's a bit clever, I get this, it's privatisation by stealth. That's the Labor Party's energy policy. Privatisation by stealth. What they're doing is they're selling off bits and pieces. They'll have the private sector build some of the new distribution network. Now, the previous Energy Minister wanted to nationalise that, a bit like the crayfish exercise, but possibly they might. I'm happy with build, own and operate. But you're having the private sector build the batteries you need. You're having the private sector build the generation that you need. It's privatisation by stealth. And you know what? If it was open and honest, I'd probably give it a round of applause. Well done, Parliamentary Secretary, on the government agenda to privatise the energy system as much as you're able. It's not a bad policy necessarily, because it saves you actually having to put your hand in your pocket, take some of the money out of Metronet and put it into poles and wires. Privatisation is the Labor Party state government's agenda for the energy system in this state. Brilliant.
Order, members. Good afternoon and welcome to Shenton College. You're very welcome to the Legislative Council. The Honourable Dan Caddy.
Thank you, President. Thank you very much. Before I start, I just want to pick up firstly on a couple of things the Honourable Steve Thomas said. It would appear that he is very much opposed to wind power, but not to hot air. One of the things you said on I should have said my good friend, the Honourable Dr. Steve Thomas. One of the things you talked about was when you were responding to the motion was nuclear power and renewable energy hand in hand. That has proven to be around the world a very difficult task to bring those two together. And we only need to look at the situation in the United Kingdom, where when the drain on energy is low, the first things that get shut off there are the renewables. And we should never, ever put ourselves in a position where the first things we are shutting off are the renewable energy sources and the cheaper forms of power. And the reason is, quite frankly, that the nuclear reactors need to be run at near on, not quite, but near on 100% the whole time. And this goes to the whole heart of this nuclear debate, which I'm not going to talk about much after this, but it's old technology. Technology is running ahead of us when it comes to renewable power in so many ways, and to go down the path of nuclear technology is to go down the path of old technology. And but it is being left behind by what's happening in the renewable space, my friend. And the other interesting thing is you talked about a wind farm some tens of kilometres off the coast. I think it's incumbent on people to look at how things work around the world, because when I lived in Copenhagen, you could see massive wind farms off the coast. In fact, they create their own ecosystems with respect to marine life. But that was in a pretty decent shipping lane there between Denmark and Sweden. The ships managed to navigate through it. Everyone manages to navigate around it. We're not the only people in the world with coastlines and boats and people that like to go out. So I just wanted to put that into perspective. That is something we should all think about. But I want to get on to the main thing. I want to thank the Honourable Sophia Mamon for this motion, because I've spoken many times in this chamber on the importance of reliable energy sources and energy security for Western Australia, and that's sort of where I wanted to take my speech today. I really wanted to concentrate on Lim C of this motion, which talks about creative and diverse solutions for the future and for a stable power supply, and talk a little bit about Western Australia and what makes us special, but also talk about what the government's doing in this space, because there is certainly a lot to talk about from this government. I wanted to contribute first by acknowledging this matter of energy security is of paramount importance to Western Australia. In this vast state in which we live, with our unique geographical challenges and ever-increasing economic ambitions, ensuring a reliable and sustainable energy supply is not merely a matter of convenience. It's not just something that we can argue with the opposition on policy about, but it's a critical foundation for our continued prosperity as a state and for our well-being. Energy security right around the world is the lifeblood of all modern societies. It powers our homes, our schools, our hospitals, and also ensures the comfort of families right around the state. It fuels our businesses, it drives innovation and enables industries that form the backbone of our economy, whether we're talking about the mining sector in the Pilbara or the agricultural sector in the wheat belt in the southwest. And without a secure energy supply, our way of life and economic growth and the very future of the state are at risk. And we face as a state a unique set of challenges in securing our energy needs. Vast distances, a very dispersed population and sparsely populated regions as well necessitate what we know are extensive and very often costly infrastructure to distribute power effectively. The increasing integration of renewable energy sources, whilst environmentally critical, also presents new layers of complexity requiring innovative solutions to maintain grid stability and reliability. However, I'm here to tell you all in this chamber that this government's not standing still in the face of these challenges. We are taking bold and decisive steps to enhance our energy security, particularly through the development and integration of renewable energy sources. I'll just touch briefly on a few. The Renewable Energy Transformation Agreement. This landmark agreement between the federal and state government signals a new era, or signalled a new era for our state's energy landscape. Contained within this was the aim of building a minimum of 6.5 terawatt hours of new wind and solar projects, enough to power millions of homes, and 1.1 gigawatts of new storage capacity. And the storage capacity, and I've spoken about it before in this chamber, is crucial for the smoothing out of the variability that comes with generation of power from renewable sources. This also provides the much needed grid stability that I'm talking about, and it helps reduce at the same time our reliance on fossil fuels, which is something that's very important to most West Australians. The retirement of the coal-fired the coal-fired power stations. And there is no clear demonstration of our commitment to a cleaner energy future than the Cook Labor government's commitment to phasing out our state-owned coal-fired power stations by 2030. It's a bold move, and it necessitated a significant investment in reliable renewable generation, in storage, to ensure that the seamless transition would take place, and to maintain a constant and seamless energy supply throughout that. This is not just about environmental stability, but also about securing our energy future in a rapidly changing world. And I can tell, member, you're dying to ask me a question, but I'll just keep going, member. I'll just keep going, member.
Order, member. Order. The Honourable Dan Caddy has the call, no matter how hard you try and detract from that. The Honourable Dan Caddy.
Thank you for your protection, President. The Energy Transformation Strategy, the state government's comprehensive energy transformation strategy, which provides a roadmap for modernising our energy system. It outlines a multifaceted approach that encompasses not only the expansion of renewable energy, but also the development of the critical infrastructure that is also required, such as transmission lines and energy storage facilities, which are there to ensure that these new sources can be effectively integrated into the current grid. This is the type of strategic vision that guides our efforts to create a more resilient, sustainable energy system for generations to come. It's the sort of strategic vision that is very much lacking on the other side of this chamber. Powering WA, the newly established entity that is tasked with a critical mission, delivering the electricity infrastructure needed to underpin our renewable energy transformation. And this includes strategic investments in transmission and distribution networks to once again accommodate the growing influx of renewable energy from across the state. And Powering WA is going to play a vital role in ensuring that our energy infrastructure can keep pace with the rapid growth of renewable generation that we're seeing, and will go a long way to ensuring a reliable and efficient energy supply right across the state, the regions, the metropolitan area, for all Western Australians. Community energy, not often talked about. So beyond large-scale projects, Western Australia is also witnessing a surge in community energy initiatives. Local communities are taking charge of their energy future, investing in renewable energy projects and contributing to a more decentralised and, through that, resilient energy system. This movement empowers communities to generate their own clean energy, reducing their reliance on the grid and fostering a sense of ownership and participation in the energy transition, and ensuring, once again, it's another step in ensuring the energy security into the future. These are just some of the initiatives underway in Western Australia, and I'll go into specifics on a couple of them shortly. We're also, obviously, as a government, investing in cutting-edge research and development in areas like advanced energy storage, microgrids and smart grid technologies. And the investment in research and development is critical, and it's not just critical for energy, it's critical in the medical fields, it's critical in other areas as well, because what extensive investment in research does is it keeps the best and brightest minds here. And I spoke also on an energy motion, one of the first things I ever spoke on in coming to this chamber, and I talked about the need for being at that cutting edge, being the vanguard of the thought dialogues when it comes to how we research and how we look for new technologies. And if we can do that in Western Australia, given the changing pace of technology in the energy sector, we are well placed then moving into the future, and we will be one of the jurisdictions that brings forward innovations that will further enhance our energy security and enable us to better manage the variability of renewable energy sources and help us with creating a more flexible and certainly more responsive energy system. So central to the Cook Government's action on climate change is this move away from coal to cleaner, reliable and affordable energy. And as all would know, we are working towards a goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And as I've mentioned, our state-owned coal-fired power stations will all be retired by 2030, and we are investing over $3 billion in wind power and battery storage. We are investing in huge batteries that are some of the biggest batteries on the planet. We're removing old power poles that have stood in paddocks for generations that are risky and unreliable. We're evolving the networks right across Western Australia to reduce emissions, but also to bring reliable power to people in the regions. Decarbonising energy systems requires diversifying power supply, from wind and solar to battery storage and other backups. And our wind and solar resources also need to be diverse to make the most of the varied weather patterns across the state, given the size of this state, and to capture renewable energy when it is available. And to this evolution of our energy systems will happen right across the state, in our main grid in the southwest of the state, in the Pilbara, and in smaller microgrids and smaller communities. And only this government, only the Cook Labor government can be trusted to deliver the energy transition that Western Australia needs and deserves. And we are delivering a sensible and managed transition to a lower carbon future. We are investing in renewables transmission and storage, and we are working with the private sector to unlock further investment and economic opportunities for the state. At least they will work with us, my friend. At least they will work with us. We will always do what is right for Western Australia. We are leading the nation when it comes to...
Order. It's Wednesday, not Thursday. The Honourable Dan Caddy.
I'm trying not to elicit a response, President, but thank you for your protection again. We are leading the nation when it comes to optimising the benefits of distributed energy resources, working with solar, working with battery and other electrical assets in the homes to ensure households can make the most of them while also supporting the energy grid. 100% Parliamentary Secretary, 100%. 100%. The government has developed, and we're in the final stages of delivery of the Distributed Energy Resources Roadmap. The roadmap obviously responded to the uptake in solar and emergence of EVs and batteries. Anyway, one of the things I wanted to speak about as well that I've spoken about before in this chamber is Project Symphony, because this is a centrepiece, and I remember I spoke on it at the time when it was very new. It's a centrepiece of the DER roadmap, WA's flagship virtual power plant pilot, coordinated through rooftop solar, batteries, other smart devices in the Southern River region of Perth, and has rewarded participants or consumers, if you like, for their participation in this project. The final Project Symphony report includes recommendations to further build on the role of households and businesses in meeting their own energy needs and sharing the benefits of that with the broader power grid. These recommendations are informing the business strategies of Western Power, which led Project Symphony, Synergy, and the Australian Energy Market Operator. This pivotal work, and it is pivotal, it demonstrates both the value that distributed energy resources can bring, but also how innovation is already identifying new solutions to meeting our increasing electricity needs. The storage systems that we are bringing online, so that the big batteries in plural in Kwinana and in Collie are just one example, and I want to talk about them a little bit because I got to do a tour. But one example of the where we are at and the leading edge of what we're doing. Along with a bus full of members, we did a tour a couple of months ago of the first of the big batteries at Kwinana, and it is impressive. It's impressive to see because of the size of it, and it's impressive to see because it's modern technology at work. But it is also impressive to hear from the people that are operating them just what they can achieve and how they work and how they are critical to the reliability of the energy supply in the area that they supply. Wind farms, as I said, I've spoken on them before. I have lived in many different countries around the world, and in all bar one of them had wind farms in close proximity. And wind farms, as well as what the Honourable Darren West said, being a cheap form of energy, they really harmonise into the landscape that they are in. You can actually have other business going on in and around wind farms, and this is one of the things that makes them exceptional. Tidal technology is another one, and I sat down and spoke to a proponent of tidal technology from Northern Europe, and it's actually in use, commercially in use in Northern Europe. I know there's one off the Faroe Islands, and this is fantastic technology. These are kites, I think they're called, but they're basically, if you can imagine, a giant stingray. So they look a bit like that, and it's about the way they're shaped and the size of them, and they work purely picking up the energy with movements in the tides. Extraordinary technology. So, whilst I acknowledge that predilection of some of those opposite today for retaining fossil fuel generation, for even going down the nuclear path, and for attacking our record, energy security is not merely about keeping the lights on. It is the bedrock of our economy. It is the bedrock of our social well-being, and it is the bedrock of our future prosperity. And thank goodness those on this side of the chamber are in charge of our future. Genuine energy security is not attained by simply refusing to participate in the renewable energy revolution as many of those opposite would advocate for. By embracing renewable energy, investing in smart infrastructure and fostering community participation, this government is taking bold but necessary steps to ensure a secure, reliable and sustainable energy future for all West Australians. We are not just building an energy system for today, but we are laying the foundations for a cleaner, more prosperous and more resilient Western Australia for generations to come.
The Honourable Louise Kingston.
Well, wasn't that interesting? I think we should all be very terrified about what we've just heard from Labor, because that is definitely not going to keep the lights on. I'm a strong believer and a strong supporter, and have been for a long time, in innovation. And sadly, we saw a lot of investment in innovation in Australia be wound back, and it's probably 45 years ago now. It's probably 10 years since I've sort of worked in any of that space. But every problem has a solution. And that is, and I was pleased to hear that there is going to be some investment in research and development way too late. But at a federal level also, that amount of investment has been wound back significantly over the course of the last few decades. Somebody said to me once, and this is probably a bit of a note for the government as well, the wheels of change move slowly, and they move slowly for a reason. And I think what we're seeing at the moment, in terms of our move to net zero 2050, provides us with enormous opportunities, but it also provides us with enormous issues that we're going to be facing. And I very much support this motion from the Honourable Sophia Mamond in terms of the focus on the regions. The regions are always the ones, because of centralisation, the fact that we have lost a significant amount of our population over the last few decades, that always pays the price to ensure that the city is looked after. That's understandable because of the population density, but it's also not fair. During a recent trip that I made through the southwest and visiting various businesses, I was absolutely shocked to be told that some of our biggest businesses down there are actually paid to switch off from the grid and rely on their diesel generators in times of high load on the system. And I couldn't actually believe that in terms of the practicality of it in the first instance, but secondly, from an economic perspective, these are the businesses that are actually earning the money and paying the wages and all that sort of thing that goes into actually paying the government's expenses. So when you get them to turn off so that, that other people have a reliable provision of electricity, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot, not once but twice. So in terms of us being able to transition out of coal by 2030, I think that's an absolute pipe dream. And unless we focus on those transitional requirements in terms of gas going forward, we're facing a whole heap of pain. Now, I'll disagree intently with the premise that nuclear won't be a part of our future, because it absolutely will. We won't get to net zero 2050. It's as simple as that with the current power generation opportunities that we have without nuclear. It is as simple as that. That will be an area that will develop rapidly around the world in terms of, as the Honourable Steve Thomas speaks about often, and the support that I lend it as well in terms of new types of nuclear generation, and we're seeing that that area rapidly transitioning overseas. And that comes back to the investment in research and development, which we are just not doing in this country in terms of how that is part of the mix, and that's where it needs to go. Take the handbrakes off it, lift the restrictions on it, and we will then see what will come out of it in terms of potentially developments for other areas around the world, as we have found, in Australia. Reminding everybody that the photovoltaic panel was actually developed in Australia all of those years ago. I was in Albany a few weeks back, and one of the fabulous businesses down there did a presentation, and she was talking about the wave power project that is going on down there and where the trial will be and that sort of stuff, which is really exciting. One of the interesting things is that they've manufactured this trial plant, but now they can't actually transport it in its current form because it's too wide to go on the roads. So they're desperately trying to find a way that they can work around that issue. In terms of wind turbines, I am vehemently opposed to it, and I've made that point very, very clear. In terms of the health impacts, which apparently many studies have shown that there are no health impacts, there were equally as many studies saying that there are significant impacts. Some of the other reasons I'm opposed to them is the fact that they will often go on prime agricultural land, similarly to solar farms, which I think are not the answer into the future either. There was an article just the other day about a big storm that had gone through this solar farm and absolutely and utterly destroyed it. Now, we're talking about, in terms of what's happened in Kalgoorlie, we're talking about an interruption to supply. Relying on these types of energy generation solely is going to be hugely problematic, particularly as many of these will be located in remote regional areas. So mobilising, sort of people to come after we've had an event like that also, we need to think about that in terms of where the people are that are going to be employed to do those sort of jobs. They're not in remote regional Western Australia at present. We are already facing significant issues in terms of accessibility to staff members for even our basic industries and businesses in our remote and regional areas. And that's why, once again, I fully support the move into the nuclear space, because that will provide jobs in regional Western Australia, and it will provide technological jobs in regional Western Australia, which we are all screaming out for to revitalise our communities, particularly in the wake of industry closures such as the timber industry. One of the other areas that I did some work on previously was waste to energy, and that didn't get mentioned today at all, which is a little unfortunate. That also will offer us some significant opportunities going forward, and the regulations and opportunities surrounding that need to be looked at as well. Most of our regional waste facilities are facing an end of their life, and this is where we could focus on looking at some research and development into these plants. We've got a number of them around the state now that are being built, and they've just sort of quietly slipped in. There hasn't been a lot of attention given to them, which I think is a bit of a shame because, because they're amazing, the technology in terms of that with plasma gasification and the ability to create energy with no emissions whatsoever. Another reason I'm vehemently opposed to wind turbines is because we had a situation when the global financial crisis hit, and one of the areas that was affected quite severely was the blue gum sector, which was something that nobody sort of realised, maybe aside from a few of us that could see that there were some issues within that industry and the planning and the implementation of it. But one of the biggest issues was that a lot of the landowners were then found responsible for the removal of those trees once they had been harvested after 2 rotations, and also the rehabilitation of their land, which far outstripped any amount of money that they had earned from those blue gums over the time that they were on their land. And this is something that is in the contracts for these wind turbines. And if those companies, which the majority of those once again are overseas companies, if they go broke, then those farmers are very likely to find themselves with the situation of having to decommission and to also address any of the contamination issues. And that's something that every single landholder should be severely concerned about. If the government really is genuine about them and really wants to see them being put in, they should be undertaking that risk themselves, so that those landowners are not left holding the baby. Batteries also are going to be hugely problematic. I mean, they're enormous for a start. And secondly, the little amount of power they actually provide is going to mean that vast areas of our landscapes are going to be taken up by these batteries. And as we know, the Honourable Sophia Momund raised the issues around the lithium batteries and the problems that many parts of the world are now facing with those, and not to mention that they don't last for an extended length of time, and that they will then need to be disposed of, which is going to be a problem into future. It's also an opportunity, as I said before, in terms of every problem has a solution. I do note that yesterday there was an article talking about the National Energy Regulator has made an eye-popping admission about Labor's renewable energy plan, and this was in Senate estimates. Basically, the National Energy Regulator says it cannot guarantee the Albanese government's renewable energy plan will lower prices. Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO, Chief Executive Daniel Westerman made the admission while fronting a Senate inquiry on Wednesday. So I think there are a lot of unknowns in this, and without proper costing on all the different things that can be provided, the people of Western Australia and Australia as a whole have absolutely no idea what our energy delivery is going to look like into the future, and also what the cost of that actually is going to be. In terms of the development of a nuclear energy industry, There are many reports, and you can look from both sides. You can find the one you're looking for that says, oh my goodness gracious, no, this is terrible, it's going to cost way more than anything else you've ever seen. And then you can find other reports that say that nuclear energy is much safer than solar and wind renewables and has a lower life carbon cycle footprint. And that is something that needs to be looked at very carefully, because the length of a nuclear energy plant, we're talking about 80 to 90 years at a minimum of the use of that, whereas we look at renewables and we look at a wind turbine or a solar panel, which has a life expectancy of around about anywhere from 25 to 35 years. So in terms of long-term cost and deliverability of energy, it makes perfect sense that we take the handbrakes off the investigation into nuclear and we actually have a look at it so it's on a level playing field. I'll also remind members that renewables were also, when they were introduced, heavily subsidised before they got to the point of being, well, some would argue they're probably not really viable even now, based on the information that I have just presented. So, in terms of regional Western Australia, and I want people to imagine that they live in the Scott River and that they have a 250 to 500 acre farm, and they all of a sudden find that they have one of these wind projects planned for that area. They were not consulted, and they are facing potentially the impact on an enormous amount of their land in terms of exclusion zones, because these are small lots of land. So the idea that we can just put these wind turbines anywhere that is deemed to be a place to put them is not fair on the individual people's rights and their property rights. They should not have to be subjected to being forced to having these wind turbines on their farms. It's actually interesting you raised that, because those that I've spoken to down at Scott River actually are very supportive of nuclear technology, and are much more supportive of nuclear technology being provided, because it provides a much bigger opportunity for energy generation in Western Australia. This is something else to think about. The size of a wind farm is massive, and it produces this much power. The size of a nuclear plant is this big, and it produces this much power. You cannot argue against the fact that is the case. Aside from that, with the wind farms that are being built, particularly in some of the areas of Queensland, where they are mowing down massive amounts of rainforest to provide these transmission lines. Now, the interruption to the weather over there, and I think it was the Honourable Sophia Mamon that actually mentioned that, in terms of the effect in changing some of the microclimates, that is very real, and that is a huge problem that we're going to face into the future. Just as an example, and if you think about it in these terms, a wind turbine, just one wind turbine, is the size of the BHP building in the middle of the city. Just one. So when you say that it's not an impost on people's properties, and it's, that's fine for those that live in the city, and they live on a small 400, maybe even less than that square metre block now. I don't understand how anybody can live like that, but that's fine. That's my opinion. If they were to put wind turbines in the backyards of, say, every 3 or 4 properties in Perth, I can categorically state that that is not going to happen. So then why is it okay to put those in regional Western Australia? Why is it okay for those companies to be overseas companies? And why, potentially into the future, will that energy generation be providing other countries with energy rather than just for Australia. So we're going to be paying the price for this transition to net zero 2050 by actually destroying a vast amount of our beautiful regional areas, not even for our own power. Those people that are faced with these projects, need to have a say in whether they want them or not. And currently that is not the case. Currently these projects that are being planned do not have, as I would say, the level of consultation and engagement that a large amount of these regional areas are requesting. So in terms of going forward, we need to take the handbrakes off of other energy generation opportunities. We need to look around the world. We need to bring back, as we used to be called, the clever country. We need to bring back investment in research and development so that we can develop new sources of energy, so we can be a leading country in terms of energy generation around the world, which is not happening at the moment. The collapse of our manufacturing sector has meant that many of those jobs, those opportunities have been discontinued, and we need to get back to having a look at how we can actually be a part of the solution in terms of energy generation into the future. Obviously, we talk about AUKUS. We know that that is coming. We know that, and a huge investment is going to be made in Western Australia. So how can we leverage off that? How can we look at that and say, okay, well, this is great for our defence forces going forward. How do we capture that in terms of providing effective energy and reliable energy generation into the future? So, in closing, I think I've made my views very clear. I absolutely support this motion that the Honourable Sophia Mamond has put forward. I think looking after regional Western Australia, and I've said this many times before, is pivotal to looking after the city as well, because regional Western Australia is the powerhouse. 25% of people in live in regional Western Australia and produce more than 50% of the GDP. So it seems sensible that they are consulted, that they are listened to, that they are understood, and that they are part of the solution going forward, that we engage those regional communities, we listen to them, we acknowledge their concerns and their issues. We put more money into research and development of potentially new technologies, particularly waste to energy as well, looking at that, and that we continue to shine brightly in terms of energy delivery going forward, because I think some of the things that have been proposed today will be hugely problematic as we go forward. Thank you.
The question is the motion be agreed. The Honourable Neil Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'm not going to speak for long on this, but I do want to just probably put a little a focus on it in relation to the consequences of not having reliable power, because I think, you know, I suppose my counsel to those opposite, before they have their final say on this, I assume there'll be a lead speaker from the government on this. Certainly the contribution by the other honourable member over there wouldn't, I don't think, categorise as a lead response, but it's something that I would suggest that maybe a reflection in the opportunity, that the minutes that are left in this debate, maybe a reflection, just a bit of self-reflection from the government's point of view about the consequences of not having a reliable power. And thank you for the interjection. Humility is actually the request I have to those opposite. And, you know, I do think of Kalgoorlie, the challenges that have been there, and the challenges for people like Steve McKenny, the butcher there, who lost $100,000 worth of produce because the power went out for nearly 3 days. You know, and this is or the manager of the IGA there that lost a similar amount of money in produce and had to be thrown out. I mean, this is the impact, and I think probably as a generalisation across all the policy areas, and we saw the Minister for Housing making some rather outrageous comments in the other place recently about a priorities document which was put out by the Liberal Party. The point is, the problem is the Labor Party is writing the Liberal Party's priority documents by themselves, because what the Labor Party is doing, what the Labor Party is doing is failing the community. What the Labor Party is doing is failing the community around housing and accommodation, and the massive shortfall that we're seeing and the terrible rental costs. What the Labor Party is doing is failing the community in relation to energy reliability. And this is so you know, it's not as though we come here in some sort of vacuum of circumstance to present these debates, because, you know, quite honestly, I suppose the vast majority, as far as it's concerned, what goes on in this place is, you know, as sometimes get described as a bit of hot air, and that's why I'm not going to keep my comments to a minimum, because I think all I'm asking is that the members opposite reflect, in finalising their response to this, reflect on some of the terrible situations that have happened. And we know this is not a one-off event, and, you know, unfortunately Kalgoorlie, Boulder have been somewhat the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, in relation to what possibly could be happening going down in the future. We know that there are transmission challenges in relation to Geraldton. You know, there are a whole range of issues in relation, as we've seen with some of the, you know, the weather events that have caused the breach in those transmission lines. So we see these challenges coming forward. We know that the climate is changing, and we all support on this side, despite what the Labor Party like to present. You know, we're pragmatic about the decarbonisation piece. We're pragmatic about it. We want to see decarbonisation, of course we do. But what we don't get from the other side is any evidence of how the effectiveness of the spend, the enormous spend of decarbonisation, $5.4 billion that has been you know, proudly trumpeted by the Labor Party in its budget paper 3 on spend of decarbonisation. But what have we got to show for it? What have we got to show for it is nearly 3 years of power cuts, 3 days of power cuts in Kalgoorlie. And not just a one-off, because in 2022 we saw a series of power cuts that occurred, and they were quite severe and had similar effects. You know, the local the race club there had, I believe they were having an event, they lost something in the order of $30,000. They were unable to, of takings they were unable to take, because all their FPOS machines went down. And this is, again, not just a one-off event. These were retailers throughout the community of Kalgoorlie that had to basically shut up shop and go home for the day, and of course that's a day's takings that are gone. You know, everyone from medical providers through to chemists, the local chemist who suddenly had stock which couldn't be resold or sold because it was it lost its refrigeration. I've spoken to those people in the streets of Kalgoorlie. I've spoken to the people affected by this, and so all I'd say is that the government needs to reflect. I think there's an excellent motion brought forward by the Honourable Sophia Mamond. It should be a moment of reflection and quiet, sober and sombre reflection by the government after this many years in power, and even, you know, the former minister, the Honourable Bill Johnston, who basically made undertakings at the time that this wouldn't happen again. And we had it all explained by my colleague here, who has explained why that black start capacity hasn't worked. That was known, and despite the maintenance that was done, when a couple of years later, when all of those things happened again, when we had the high voltage line was cut, one of the high voltage lines was cut because because of an event on that line. What we had was a complete failure of that black start capacity to actually get going again. So, you know, we've talked about these things before. I've brought a petition to this place about these things before. It sort of pains me a bit to have to sort of be up here speaking about it again. And as I said, in order to keep this contribution brief, I just want to say, just in final comments, just reflect with some humility before you get up to speak about this. Think of the people that are impacted by the incredibly unreliable power system that we currently have in Western Australia.
Question is the motion be agreed. The Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, honourable member, the honourable Sophia Mormon for bringing such a constructive and useful motion to the House. It does make a nice change from what we have to endure sometimes. I do appreciate your interest. I do appreciate your interest in this subject. And members, I can talk for hours. I can talk for hours. I can even talk under wet cement for hours about energy, probably equally as much as I can the 2010 AFL Grand Final between St Kilda and Collingwood. But that's another matter. That's quite another matter. I can as enthusiastically talk about energy under wet cement for hours as I can about those amazing pair of grand finals. So, but seriously, members, look, I do acknowledge the genuine interest and concern that the honourable member has brought around this motion, and will frame the government's response as such. Now, I have had a chat to the member behind the chair, and I'm just flagging early that I will be proposing some very small amendments. Some very small amendments that will change a couple of the terms to, I think, make the motion even stronger than it is at the moment, and I'll get to those later in my contribution. But this is a good motion, and the government generally supports the motion. Now, the first point I want to make, the honourable member made was about that blackout in the Kalgoorlie, the Wheatbelt, and the Perth Hills last January. Now, these power outages were caused by supercell storm events, freak storm events that toppled towers designed to withstand winds of up to 280 kilometres an hour. So clearly a very significant storm event. And then, yes, we had the unfortunate situation where we were unable to fire up the generators in Kalgoorlie. We've since committed to replace those generators. They are ageing, and we will replace those so that won't happen again. But can I acknowledge the great advocacy on behalf of that community by Ali Kent, the member for Kalgoorlie, who was working tirelessly day and night to help get some answers for the community, and we did get a restart by using some pretty creative ways of managing the electricity network. Now, what members opposite do need to understand, and that they will work out one day, is that electricity is dangerous. Electricity can kill people, and so whenever there is a fault in the system turns off, and it turns off for good reason. Now, the alternative is to leave the system live and risk people's lives. So, no, we are cautious when there is damage to the network, and rightfully so. So we do apologise to the people of Kalgoorlie. We've done that, and to the Wheatbelt and to the Hills. But I think what this outage shows was the contrast between the Coalition's position to privatise Western Power and our position to keep that public utility in public hands. Because when people come to our offices with complaints and issues around the system, we actually have a way and a mechanism to get those complaints and issues resolved. Now, try that with Telstra. The company privatised by a coalition government. Look at the contrast between how we can resolve those issues on behalf of our constituents, that is, the people that own the system, than we can with organisations that are privately owned. So I do want to acknowledge that power outage. That was a significant one. That's certainly something we're working to have. Should we have had our time again? Maybe would have had things a little bit different. Learn from it. Now, the other limbs of the motion regarding generation that the member raised, nuclear, renewable, fossil fuel. So for many years we've relied on fossil fuels for our power generation. And I note that in the UK in about 1882, they started this by building coal-fired power generation, and actually it kicked off the Industrial Revolution. I think it was 1882 was the year that's in my mind. Last month, significantly, the UK turned off its final coal-fired power station. They have no coal-fired power generation in the UK. They were the pioneers, and they are the first ones out. And there is a good reason. There's a good reason why they've done this is because it's called new technology. And I know it can be a little bit difficult for those opposite.
Thank you. Please direct your remarks through the chair.
Thank you, Chair, for your protection, and I will take that advice. So, look, the honourable member, Sophia Mamon, gets it. The government gets it. There's a few people who don't quite get it. That new technology is evolving our world, and one of those new technologies is the movement away from coal-fired power generation to renewable and storage. Now, nuclear power is used in other parts of the world. Large grids can sustain nuclear power. I'm telling you, member, it is never going to happen here in Western Australia because of economics. Not because of political sentiment or anything like that. It's not going to happen because of economics. And I think I detected a little bit of a crab walk back from the Honourable Steve Thomas, who did get the opportunity to unleash his inner energy nerd, and we do love it when he does that, because I can do that as well. But I did think I did just detect a little bit of crab walking away from such effusive support of nuclear power. So, look, I'm going to talk about some of the things. Look, and I just want to touch on wind. For those that aren't aware, wind is the cheapest form of power generation. That's why there's so much wind power going in around the world. And because, I'll let you in on another little secret, consumers, whether they be business or residential customers, they want as lower power bills as they can get. Right? So when customers want the lowest power bills that they can get, they want the cheapest source of power to be providing that power, and that cheapest source of power is wind. And when the tenders for pricing go about every 5 minutes to AEMO, often wind will tender zero or negative for providing that power. So the cheapest source of power that you can get in the wholesale energy market is wind. So naturally, and the most expensive is small modular nuclear reactors, which haven't even been invented yet, and the next most expensive is nuclear power. So why would a political organisation pin its tail to the nuclear donkey when it's so much more expensive, and it's going to provide more expensive power bills to households than wind, which is the cheapest form of power? I still haven't quite figured that out. Maybe one day someone will let the opposition know that the cheapest power is what consumers want the most. Now, look, all this concerning data and conspiracy about wind farms. I'll just make a point. Around Western Australia, there are several large companies, many of them, of course, multinational, as we've had in energy generation for a long time, speaking to freehold landowners about potentially siting wind turbines on freehold land on their farms. And what you'll find is that most of these farmers will say, where do I sign? This is a good deal for me, diversifies the income on my farm. That's what most of them are saying. And so we have people opposite saying, no, you can't put that commercial arrangement on freehold land. Well, look, I'm sorry, but if it's freehold land, that landowner has the right to undertake any lawful activity on that land that will generate the best deal for their business. And it's not up for people in this House to tell them, they've got the right to say no, it's freehold land. They do so. And so it's not up for people who sit in chairs in this parliament to say what farmers can and can't have on their land. These are commercial arrangements on freehold land. And I think that point needs to be made in this aversion to wind debate. It's anything. And offshore wind, the member for Bunbury is quite right. I think the zone for offshore wind is a suitable zone, but we're not going to see it in our lifetime. Offshore wind provides wind at a later into the evening than onshore wind, than offshore projects, and that's why there is an interest from energy generators to explore that line of generation. And I understand, I can get that. That makes complete business sense. But it's not going to happen for a while yet, and there will be 40 k's offshore. People don't swim that far out, member, and very few of them go out there in boats, and you will not see these. You will not see these from the shore. So, well, I don't think 40 k's is a long way out. You're going to have pretty good eyes to see something 40 k's away. So, you know, yeah, I'll go 40 k's away. You won't see me when I'm 40 k's away, remember. I just want to have a touch on. I just want to touch on a few other points here that I've made. I've made some dot points that I just want to respond, because, as I say, we do in general support this motion. It's a good motion. It's constructive, and it's what people outside this parliament, the sort of things that they want us talking about. They want us talking about. We are central to our plan, our action on climate change, is the move away from coal to cleaner, reliable and affordable energy. So is most of the rest of the world. So we're not orphans in that. WA is working towards its goal of net zero emissions by 2050. That's what we're working towards. There's the plan. And we've got some really good people. Some of the best people in the energy in the business world are working on the energy transition. And can I acknowledge all of them for their wonderful work, because they're going to get us there. They really are. All our coal-fired power stations, as the UK has done, will be closed by 2030, and we'll close them responsibly. And we have already taken the decision to keep one going for one more summer, because we weren't sure that we were ready. We only had one K-BESS battery in operation. This summer we'll have two, and in future we'll have two more big batteries in Collie that will help us get through the summer. So we're doing it responsibly, but the plan is to have them all phased out by 2030, and we will do that. $3 billion. That's $3,000 million of taxpayers' money investing into wind power and battery storage to provide cheaper power and reliable power. We're removing those old power poles that I have to drive around in the middle of the night on a 12-metre wide seating bar or 36-metre wide sprayer. We're taking a lot of those out. And members, here's a stat that will hurt your mind. 53% of our Western Power network services 3% of our customers. So if we can convert those 3% over to standalone power systems, new technologies and microgrids, we can remove 53% of our network. That cuts our maintenance costs by 53%. It all cuts our risk profile by 53%. So we're going to do that. Now, we're going to have to use new technology. We're going to have to use new technology to make that switch. We're going to use new technology to make that switch. And I'm old enough to remember coming home from school for the first time and the connection of the power system. Yeah, the first time I can remember coming home and the freezer was running, and I knew that the new freezer we'd bought that was 240 volt was running. I knew the power was on, and we didn't have to go and start the 32 volt power system, because that was my job, to go down and start the power system. So I'm old enough to remember when that came in, but now we're moving to new technology, because that was new technology at the time. Remember in school that you had to have a circuit, right? You had to have a circuit to make the light bulb go on in science. Well, now we can make these long one-way with new technology in the 60s. So new technology enabled us to have a Swiss. New technology is enabling us now to move away to more locally distributed energy systems. If you can't make solar and storage work in Western Australia, you're not going to make it work anywhere else. Solar, wind and storage, renewables and storage. We've got an abundance of wind and abundance of solar, and we've got everything we need to make batteries and store that power. That's what we're going to do. Now, I just want to talk about the Swiss, because that is publicly owned, thanks to this government. We scrapped the coalition fire sale of Western Power, and we still own the Swiss. So we're all going to. This system has relied on coal. This system has relied on coal that's been good to us and long provided reliable power, but we can use the Swiss to now make that transition, and we'll begin that shift. I tell you, members, you also, another thing that you may not know is that there are 450,000 rooftop solar systems in Western Australia. So can I thank all the people that have invested in that rooftop solar, because you have made a big investment in our move to the transition away from fossil fuels to clean energy. So can I thank all of the people that have done that? And can I just give you a little warning that sometimes on a Saturday all the new systems are able to be switched off. And we need to do that because of what's called spinning capacity. We can only run the energy at such a low level. So on a Saturday or a Sunday, when industries and a lot of businesses aren't using power, sometimes we get our power consumption to a minimum demand. So what we're able to do now is switch off some of those later rooftop solar systems. You build a nuclear reactor, member, and you might want to think about how many of those systems you would have to turn off on a Saturday. And the answer is all of them. So for anyone who's installed rooftop solar, I'm not sure they're so keen on your nuclear idea that perhaps you are. But I'll just make that little point. We're investing in large battery storage. The battery will have, our Collie battery will have storage, the Synergy one, to store power for 800,000 homes for 4 hours. Now, there's another battery going in down in Collie about that size or even bigger. It's slightly bigger. So, because, you know, in anything you do, you like to have it slightly bigger than the other person's. That's a privately owned one. And they will be able to generate income from that battery by buying power at times of low demand and high supply and selling that back in the opposite environment. Now, that's a good bit economic opportunity, and good on them. Good on them. Good on them. Just as much of the generation is privately generated. This Collie battery will complement the two Kwinana batteries, but increasingly renewable for the ongoing reliable but increasingly renewable supply for Perth and beyond. And the point's been made that we also need to consider the metropolitan area in Western Australia. We're all power users. It doesn't matter where you live, everyone's equal. We're also looking to support the connection of large-scale renewables. We know that for the industry to carbonise reliable, demand for electricity could increase by up to 800% by 2042. And we expect that we'll have about over 90% renewables at that time. We've invested $1 billion into Western Power's planning and construction for the new network that will need to expand. Remaining and we'll keep that in state hands because it's owned by the people of Western Australia, and they actually have a pretty strong view on that. We're doing a lot in terms of the Pilbara energy transition, which I'm not really going to have time to run into detail, but we are transitioning the Pilbara as well. It's not just the Swiss across to, and I do acknowledge the work of Fortescue and others that are moving to renewable energy projects, looking at electrifying the trucks. Hydrogen trucks, it's all in evolution at the moment because we all know that we have to make this transition. We'll adapt where the Horizon Power are also adapting, and I've talked about the Western Power summer storms, the distributed energy resources, which the Honourable Dan Caddy has touched on briefly, and I do support the comments that he made, and particularly about Project Symphony. What a wonderful success that has been, and I am amazed at every time I meet the people who worked on that, how committed and dedicated and how smart they are. It does take a little bit of keeping up for someone like me to keep up with how far ahead they are in their thinking and what they're working on and their research and development into making this transition. The energy transition is probably the biggest game in town at the moment. I think it's fair to say. So I'll talk about Horizon Power's networks. I've talked about such examples as the Exmouth EV orchestration, you may not realise, but people are actually able to use the power from their electric vehicles in Exmouth on a trial into their homes. We're working on that V2G technology. We've also done the regulation of the remote communities around the state. Horizon's doing a lot of work on that, the Western Power network as well. I've also got standalone power systems, so just an update on those. These millions of dollars to ensure power to the people at the end-of-line situations, and I've talked about the network before. The SPS typically includes solar batteries and a backup generator to supply enough power to serve the needs of farming business and homesteads, and we're not big power users, but we do want reliability, and these are actually more reliable than the network. The systems run independently from the grid. They have higher levels of renewable power, and in many cases, people tell me that the generator never comes on except when they start it up for a run. Over 5 years, the property have reduced their power outages up to 90% that have had them installed. 217 SPS located across the Midwest, and we went right through the Cyclone Seroja affected areas and put a lot in there. Goldfields and Eastern Wheatbelt in the Great Southern are part of the rollout, so 217 out. There's 7 in the Swiss area, 79 SPS across the Kimberley, Pilbara, Gascoynes and Goldfields, Esperance outside. And that's only part of the solutions. Underground power, the member talked about, it is an expensive option for high transmission, and it is an expensive option where you don't have a house every few metres to find out where the fault actually is. It's very difficult to find faults, but if you have a street and the power's out at one end of the street and not at the other end of the street, you can get a fair handle on finding that fault. It also is more expensive to put in. Yeah, 2 minutes. So I'll get to my. I'm just getting to my amendment to the motion. So. I do like your motion, member. We really do like your motion, but the energy nerd, and we support the motion. But the energy nerd in me just can't let it go without a couple of changes that I think actually makes this a better. That'll be Dr. West to you, member. So a couple of points here that I have consulted, and in paragraph 1 to delete the word sources and insert supply. So that is more of an energy term. We talk about an energy supply rather than energy source because we have multiple sources in the system. In paragraph C to delete stable and use reliable because an energy system must be stable. It will turn itself off if it's not stable. So it must be stable. So we want reliability here. So just to make that very small change. And in paragraph D, for reasons that I've just outlined, to delete a means to provide and insert one of the means to providing, because as we've outlined in this, there are many ways that we are going to transition across to renewable energy in Western Australia. So I do thank the member for the motion. I know we've had a chat about the amendment, and I think we have some agreement on that. It is something that is worthwhile that will come out of debate in the Legislative Council on a Wednesday.
Members.
Sophia, do you accept?
Yes,
Members, we'll put the motion
So,
first
Chair.
of all.
Acting President. Yeah.
The Honourable Peter Collier.
Thank you. West said he intended to move these amendments to the motion. Didn't actually move the amendments. No, you can't stand up now. Your time's up. He didn't actually move the amendments.
Yeah, I can't move it.
No, he didn't. No, he did not.
Members, Members, it may well be that the form of words used to move the amendment were not according to the previous standards, but I did, sitting in this chair, understand that the motion was moved as such. And I would therefore rule that there is no point of order. So the question is that the motion be that the words to be deleted. All those that opinion say aye.
Wait.
Okay.
Honourable Sophia Moment.
Thank you, Acting Chair. I support the amendments. Thank you.
Very good. Members, in that case, we will put these three changes together in one bulk, unless there's any objection from the floor. And I will put the motion that the words to be deleted be deleted. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I believe the ayes have it. And the motion is that the words to be inserted be inserted. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. The motion is passed. Members, the motion as amended now will read that A, acknowledges the need for reliable energy supply in the regions, B, recognises that energy infrastructure built above ground is and will continue to be impacted by changing climates and natural disaster, C, agrees that creative and diverse solutions will be necessary in the future to maintain reliable supply, and considers a decentralised power grid as one of the means to providing increased stability and reassurance of continued reliable energy during a time of rising electricity usage. The question now is that the motion be agreed to. The Honourable Wilson Tucker.
Acting President, we've clearly saved the best to last today. Look, I'd just like to speak on the aspect relating to I would like to focus on, firstly, I'd like to thank the Honourable Sophia Momont for raising this motion. I am supportive of the motion. I will stay out of the political cut and thrust today around wind farms and nuclear. I think we can reserve at least my opinions on both of those forms of energy generation for another day. I will say, as a former resident of Bunbury, I do find the argument that these wind farms are ugly a little bit confusing, because I have seen the artist's rendition if you go to the website for the consultation, and I had to click and then zoom to actually see where those wind farms will be on the horizon, and members, I could barely see them. And so as a former resident, as certainly as a non-resident of Bunbury, I don't buy that argument, but I will leave that for another day. Acting President, for the time that I do have, I'd like to focus on the aspect of telecommunication security during emergencies. And I will say it goes to clause B of the motion, the original and the unamended motion. Recognise that the energy infrastructure built above ground is and will continue to be impacted by changing climates and natural disasters. And obviously, if we're talking about telecommunications reliability, then having the energy distribution and having the network working as intended is very important. We are seeing a lot more, as the Honourable Darren West spoke about, these microgrids having battery backups and redundancy on the telecommunication towers. Obviously, in those extreme cases where the energy grid is cut off for a significant amount of time, then those diesel generation units won't run in perpetuity. So they will run out, and certainly in regional WA, the level of redundancy available for the grid and to keep those telco towers online and available isn't quite the same as in the cities. And a clear case of this is obviously the Kimberley floods. Members will recall where we had a number of residents who were cut off physically and certainly digitally for a number of days. Now, one idea I do actually like when we talk about telecommunication reliability is the interoperability of carrier networks during emergencies. Now, obviously, when we talk about telecommunications, it's mostly falling to the federal jurisdiction. It's well within their scope and their remit. The WA does fund certain programs around black spots where the carriers themselves don't believe that it's commercially viable to create these towers. So, the WA government is certainly responsible for the people that live here, and they do have certainly some skin in the game when we talk about telecommunications. Now, one aspect that I think is important here, and certainly something I would say is in the federal remit, but that's nothing to stop the WA government from having some advocacy and having conversations, is about that interoperability of those carrier networks, certainly during emergencies. An example of this, members, will be when if someone is signed up to the Telstra network, the Telstra tower isn't working during an emergency, perhaps that diesel generation, that power backup isn't working as expected, but the Optus tower is working. Now, there was back in 2023, the Minister for Energy put out I believe it was a consultation paper, and there was a task force that was announced in this space, and they were looking into it. It is a solved problem. It's not a technical. It's not a technical consideration, or there's nothing technically getting in the way of this happening. I think it's more political and having those dialogues, and certainly one certainly related to the competition market as well, and one in which the government can certainly play a role at various levels, state and federal, to try and put a little bit of pressure, I'd say, on these telcos to play nicely, and certainly trying to provide more communication options for West Australians in those emergencies, where obviously being available and being able to talk to family and friends during those emergencies is something that's very important. This is probably a bit of a rhetorical question, I believe, because we've already had the government response. So I was hoping to stand up and perhaps get a bit of a response around if the state government has had any conversations with the federal government and they know what this current status is around this inquiry, or this, I believe it's a task force that was looking into this very problem announced back in 2023, and if the appropriate minister, I believe it's probably the minister opposite, Minister for Digital for Emergency Services, if there's been any conversations with your counterparts. Okay. So it will be rhetorical, and certainly it's one that I think, I think it's a bit of a low-hanging fruit here. It's something that, it's a problem that, again, it's not really the technical requirement here. I think it's more of a political will to try and get it done, but it's one that I think will be beneficial for the people of Western Australia.
The Honourable Martin Aldridge. Bearing in mind you have only 2 minutes.
Thank you, Acting President. I rise just for a couple of minutes. I mean, I strongly disagree with some of the comments just made by the Honourable Wilson Tucker with respect to those telecommunication networks. And it should be important to recognise that telecommunication networks are interoperable in times of emergency. So O calling, it doesn't even matter if you have a plan or if you've got some credit on your prepaid device, whatever network is available will be available to your handset when you call 000, as long as you have coverage. No, this is. I need 2 hours to respond to your economic arguments around forcing private network operators to share their resources. I do want to respond to the contribution. I mean, it's interesting that the Parliamentary Secretary for Energy, who provided the government response, I think he was the Parliamentary Secretary for Agriculture and Food at the time, when he famously told everyone in Western Australia who were whinging about their power outages to go buy a generator. Well, since then he's been promoted to the Parliamentary Secretary for Energy, and I think it's important to reflect on those comments from that time, because what we saw just a few months ago in January of this year was the Water Corporation put out a broadcast, not just to a town or to a few customers, but to the entire wheat belt and goldfields regions, imploring them to stop using water. Why was that? Because they didn't have any power to run their pumps and their pipes and their filtration systems. So perhaps the Parliamentary Secretary for Energy should have a chat to the Parliamentary Secretary for Water, who sits just across the aisle from him, and give him the advice that he gave to Western Australians, which is buy a generator. Why doesn't the Water Corporation have generation capacity to ensure, just a few months ago, in the year 2024, we're not talking some 5 decades before us, where we're telling people to turn off the tap because we're going to run out of water. Now keep in mind what else happens in January, Acting President. It's also the height of our high threat period for fire and natural disasters such as cyclones, particularly in the south of Western Australia. Networks, regardless of whether we underground them, above ground them, separate them, break them down, build them up, they're always going to be vulnerable to interruption. It's how we provide for redundancy and therefore how resilient we are when, not if, those networks are disrupted.
The Honourable Sophia Marmond in reply.
Thank you, Acting President. Thank you, everyone, for this very lively discussion. I think it was very educational and insightful. And so many passionate people in here wanting to fight for the rights of West Australians, which is really good, even though you might be on opposite sides of the spectrum. Good to see that there is some understanding that offshore wind turbines in Geograph Bay is not necessarily a good idea. The visual static may only be one of those aspects related to that. Personally, I'm more concerned about the wildlife in the area. I don't think, though, that people go out diving and boating 40 kilometres offshore. It was interesting, though, to note that the original proposal was for 20 kilometres offshore, and when that was brought up as a consideration, that was actually changed in the end. And that related mostly to, I think, the whale migration pathways. Thank you too to the Honourable Steve Thomas for mentioning the research regarding continued vibrations and infrasound with wind turbines. Going on PubMed, there is quite a bit of research on there that shows that there are possible effects associated with that, though there is a link with people not being involved in the planning and finding it difficult to appreciate the aesthetics of wind turbines. thank you to the Honourable Dan Caddy and the Honourable Darren West for their in-depth responses. In regards to nuclear power being old technology, wind is actually much older than that. And I do believe that wind should be a part of our energy future. I just think that we need to look at better options than large wind turbines. And so far, the research I've seen on the smaller wind tulips, which are local, which would fit in very well to the microgrid, which would fit on a roof with solar panels, seems to be a safer option in comparison. There's also no oils involved in wind tulips either, and that is, and they're very low maintenance compared to wind turbines, which do require specialised infrastructure and continued maintenance. Now, some of the oils that are used in wind turbines could be replaced with biodiesel and similar oils made from hemp as well. Now, in trying to find out information around the cost of power, with the Honourable Darren West mentioning that wind power is the cheapest, I have not been able to find suitable sources for any of that sort of data, and I would like to see that. I would like to see a comparison of the power output, the cost of that output, and the amount of subsidies that are involved in those particular industries, and then where that money is going as well. In conclusion, though, I think the future of West Australian energy landscape must be one that embraces resilience, sustainability and innovation, and that microgrids offer for communities the autonomy, reliability and security that is needed to withstand the growing impacts of climate change. They empower remote and vulnerable areas by localising power generation and reducing the risks associated with long, fragile transmission lines. Through microgrids, we can ensure that no community is left behind and that everyone has access to stable, affordable energy. Thank you.